Michael P. Daniel was born October 20th, 1928, in Morphy, a small village of western Macedonia, Greece. Michael was the youngest of 4 sons. Like Michael, 2 of his older brothers were also drawn to music. One was the village Byzantine cantor, while the other a schoolteacher who dabbled with the violin. And so, the violin was to be the first instrument of young Michael. Even as a child, such was his passion for music that during the German occupation of his village in 1941, Michael hid in the water collection cistern to practice his violin, knowing that there he would not be heard and discovered by the German occupiers. After World War II, civil war ravaged Greece, and Mike left his village for the safety of a nearby town, Tsotili, where he studied privately with a Greek-American music teacher. In 1949, after he lost his beloved mother to cancer, he went to Thessaloniki to study further at the Conservatory of Music. There he spent 2 years while also working at local night spots. It seems that the popular music of the day was the European classic style, which favored the accordion over the violin. So, Mike reinvented himself and switched to the accordion. In 1953, Mike returned to his village for something whose time had come. As a young man, Mike had eyes only for Eleni, a local village girl 7 years his junior. Their families knew each other since they were children, and he always knew that one day she was to be his wife. As a teenager, Eleni was courted by Mike's evening serenades outside her window that included a song he had written for her called Thimame. In 1954, they were married. The newly married couple left the village and finally settled in Thessaloniki. Mike took a job as a musician at a local nightclub, I Chortadzides. 2 years later, he had to leave the job to allow for another promising young singer named Grigoris Pithikotsis. Life was difficult in Greece in the 50s. Even after World War II and the Civil War, work was scarce. Wanting a better life, in 1956, Mike and Eleni, with the equivalent of $50 in their pockets, boarded the Queen Frideriki shipliner for America. Eleni's brother and grandfather had left Greece years earlier and sponsored them both to start a new life in the U.S. The couple settled in Astoria, Queens, New York. In an unfamiliar country far from home and a stranger to its language and customs, Mike was eager to take any job he could to support himself and his wife. His brother-in-law had ties to the Biltmore Hotel in Manhattan, where Michael's first job was bussing tables. Eleni, an accomplished seamstress, took a sewing job in a New York City factory. There she met a young woman whose husband worked at a Mediterranean nightclub in New York City called the Britannia, located on the notorious 8th Avenue stretch between 28th and 30th Streets. After a quick audition, Michael left the Biltmore Hotel and happily took his first job as a musician in the States. At Britannia, for 2 years, Mike played accordion and performed vocals as a member of the 8-piece band. One evening, the owner of a neighboring club in the area visited the Britannia and heard Mike's vocals, in particular those songs of his favorite Nikos Gounaris. He hired him on the spot, and thus began his 5-year term at the famed Egyptian Gardens. One night in 1960, at the Egyptian Gardens, Mike had the pleasure of performing for a large group of, as he was informed, popular American entertainers. Among them were Sammy Davis Jr. and Shirley MacLaine. They took in the program with great interest and admiration. MacLaine was particularly amused by the raining dollar bills, chartura, a common audience gesture of merriment. At the end of the evening, she took a large basket and gathered the dollar bills herself and presented it to the musicians. It was 4 a.m., closing time, when Sammy Davis Jr. approached Mike and asked if he and a few backup musicians would come to his suite at the Plaza Hotel for an after-hours party performance. They accepted the generous request. As Mike later recollected, how gracious and kind they all were. It was an unforgettable night. In the 1960s, working conditions for musicians were difficult on 8th Avenue. The program ran from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. of nonstop music with only a few minutes break for each. In addition, the ventilation systems were non-existent in these clubs, and the thick smoke from the cigars and cigarettes was inescapable. So, in 1963, Mike decided to leave the Egyptian Gardens and start his own band, which was to become the legendary Mike Daniels Orchestra. Conforming to the popular big band era style of the 40s and the 50s, the first version of the band had 12 to 16 musicians with a repertoire of European, American, the Greek traditional, and later laiko styles. As Greek music was changing in the late 60s, Mike reinvented himself once more, adapting to the lead Greek instrument, the bouzouki. It was the start of an almost 40-year stretch of one of the Greek-American community's most beloved orchestras of the time. As the band became more popular, it reached a peak in the 70s and 80s when Mike Daniels Orchestra worked nonstop, averaging 5 to 9 gigs each week. Mike Daniel and his orchestra accompanied many a Greek celebrity and local artists such as Nana Mouskouri, Zeni Vanu, Yorgos Zabetas, Yannis Papaioannou, Nikos Gounaris, Andreas Parkoulis, Doukisa, Michalis Violaris, Trio Belcanto, Laura, Eva Stil, Marion Siva, Fotis Gonis, Dinos Ikonomou, Jim Apostolou, among many more. Of particular note was a concert performance by Cleo Denardou and Yorgos Hatzinasios at New York City's Town Hall, and also the wedding in Lausanne, Switzerland, of the daughter of Greek shipping magnate George P. Livanos. Another memorable moment for Mike was when he was hired to play for Nana Mouskouri at her introductory meeting with the legendary American singer Harry Belafonte. The collaboration between Belafonte and Mouskouri, born at this performance, was the beginning of numerous successful LP recordings by the two vocalists. In 1967, Mike recorded his first LP, which was a huge success. Soon after, he and his orchestra were regulars for many years on the Maria Papadatos Greek TV show on Channel 47. The summer getaways to New York's Catskill Mountain resorts where Mike Daniels Orchestra reigned was a favorite every year. The local Greek communities of the tri-state area flocked to the Monte Carlo, the Sunset Springs, the Starlight, the New Olympia, the Kalithea, among others, where many lasting memories were created. Mike's life also developed as his family grew, with the addition of two children, Paul and Aphrodite. Paul became a commercial airline pilot, and Aphrodite continued Mike's tradition, as did her daughter, of music, as a vocalist and executive producer of Symphonia Entertainment, Inc. Today, Mike, 92, and Eleni, 86, live in Bergen County, New Jersey, and enjoy their grandchildren Rena, Christina, and George as often as they can. Mike still dabbles on the keyboard every morning.